Hey Burnout besties, Peter Goose here, former teacher turned burnt out corporate millennial turned burnout mindset coach for millennials. So if you're feeling a little bit stuck in this burnout grind, despite trying all the usual fixes like therapy and yoga and meditation, then you're in the right place. Help is on the way. But are you just stressed or are you officially burnt out? Let's break down how everyday stress turns into burnout to give you a bit more insight into this question and make sense out of some of those symptoms. So let's take a journey inside the mind, brain, and body for a moment. So when your emotional brain recognizes something in its environment that triggers fear, anxiety, stress, or threat, it reacts fast. First of all, the amygdala fires off. This is a tiny almond-shaped part of your reptilian brain that processes emotions. Anytime it feels threatened, it signals the body to go into fight or flight mode. And when this happens, hormones also get signaled to flow through the body, like cortisol and adrenaline, to help you run away faster. And because all your energy reserves are required for survival mode, your prefrontal cortex, or your logical thinking brain, goes offline. Now, this is the part of your brain that's in charge of motivation, goals, analytical thinking. So that brain fog you might be feeling, the lack of motivation and goals, it all starts to make a little bit more sense when you realize that this is going on inside your brain. Now, the thing is, thoughts are still happening, right? But these thoughts are mostly driven by your subconscious patterns of our past. Rather than using up any energy on coming up with a logical plan, your brain seeks out associations to past experiences of the same emotion to determine your reactions and your next thought. This is where it gets interesting for millennials and those that grew up in the world of the 80s and 90s. Our subconscious mind operates based on a mindset of beliefs, what we believe to be true about ourselves and our reality. And our recurring thoughts while in survival mode stem from these beliefs. And for many of us, we were conditioned from a young age for constant competition. Get the good grades, get that good college degree, and you too can have the potential reward of a life filled with success and wealth. Our parents taught us what they thought would keep us safe based on a world of the 90s. So a few different beliefs got formed from a very young age. Number one, my level of worth comes from my level of productivity. Number two, I only receive the validation and approval from others when I'm constantly achieving. And number three, and this is probably the most sabotaging, mental health is bad. We don't talk about it out loud. These beliefs and many others are running a subconscious program of our mind that creates 95% of our thoughts in any given moment, especially when we're in burnout mode. Now, don't get me wrong. The job itself might just suck, or maybe it's the toxic work environment. That's like the rock splashes of stress that we can't avoid unless we leave. But what keeps us stuck are the ripple effects, created by those same subconscious beliefs that talk us out of change and keep us in a cycle of re-triggering the stress reaction by our subconscious thoughts alone. And so, even though we have this conscious goal to live a life of less stress and more happiness, our subconscious mind doesn't know what that means. It only knows go, 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 and do, do, do. And the thing is, that belief system, that user manual for life that our parents were sure would keep us safe and out of danger, no longer works. Because the simple truth is, the world has done a 180 since the more simple ways of life in the 90s, right? Inflation is 8% a year, but the cost of living salary increase is still at 2% per year. And so the rewards that so many of us felt like we were promised still seem so far off. Enter bad dopamine. Because our brains no longer see the reward as worth the effort required, let alone achievable at all, our motivation balloon goes pop. Not only are we beyond exhausted from years of fight or flight mode, but we feel like we don't have the motivation for our goals anymore because our brain hasn't yet realized any rewards from all of our efforts. So we seek out other sources of dopamine that give us that feel-good feeling. Alcohol and other substances, doom scrolling on social media, using things like food to bring a sense of comfort. But remember, those subconscious beliefs are running the show. So even when we do lay down to rest, our mind races at 1,000,000 miles an hour because we've learned and become conditioned for the narrative that rest is lazy. Get back up, buttercup, because you've got things to do, like survive. Our mind has programmed our body to survive on a constant flow of caffeine and cortisol. And so now we have this built-in addiction to stress. Stress has become like our protective mechanism, our mask. As long as I'm always stressed out doing more people-pleasing and overcommitting, well, people see me as enough. So the very thing that we're trying to create less of in our lives, stress, is also our subconscious protective mechanism to stay safe from future stress. The narrative tells us if you're not getting what you want out of life, you must just not be working hard enough. It's a feedback loop where your emotions trigger physical and mental changes, where your subconscious thoughts alone throw you right back into another fight or flight response. And for many of us, that feedback loop goes on unconscious to us for years until one day the body finally gives up, where your adrenal glands can no longer pump out the massive amounts of cortisol and adrenaline required to keep your body going at the rate you've been demanding. At this point, you've entered well into the burnout zone, where you've gone from fight or flight to freeze, where dissociation becomes your go-to habit because you literally have no energy left to process your emotions in a healthy way, where the slightest little annoyances can throw you over the edge in ways like they never did before, because your cup is already full, and the tiniest little drop makes you boil over. Where you wake up at 3 a.m. with a panic attack out of nowhere because your cortisol regulation is just that out of whack. And where you isolate yourself because you've convinced yourself that there's something wrong with you and nobody will understand. This is burnout. You're tired but wired with a mind that's living in survival mode, creating worst case scenario predictions about your future for one reason only. It doesn't think you're safe. And its main function is to keep you alive. So it's doing its job just as it was designed to do. So now that you're aware, the big question is now what? What do you do about it, right? And that's where my 4 R's framework comes into play. The first R is what you've already started to do, to recognize not only what's happening in the physical body with burnout, but to also recognize what's happening in the subconscious mind, beginning to identify those sabotaging beliefs that kept you safe at one point in your life, but are now keeping you stuck. The second R is regulate and recover. Think about it as your immediate relief. You'll learn the brain science behind hormone regulation, like how to naturally decrease your cortisol levels and increase your dopamine levels through brain-based habits grounded in research. Once you start taking part in just 1 or 2 simple habits, you're going to begin to slowly reparent your brain to feel safe again. The third R is the inner work of reprogramming those subconscious beliefs that create 95% of your thoughts. Because you can go do the yoga and the meditation, but if the next thought that you think is about work and stress, you've just done all that work for nothing. This is where the secret sauce of NLP, or Neurolinguistic Programming, comes into play. NLP is a framework that was created in the 70s by 2 individuals that studied some of the most world-renowned therapists, psychologists, and researchers in the field. And they put all of this into a structure to understand how the subconscious mind communicates so that we can begin to speak to it in a way that creates lasting, sustainable change and transformation. And there's a misconception out there that you have to go see a licensed therapist for this kind of stuff. And don't get me wrong, I'm a huge proponent of therapy if it helps you. But NLP is not only for the use of therapists. It can be used by anyone as long as you know how it works, including on yourself. And as a certified NLP coach, I don't think there's as large of any other audience that needs this type of stuff more than millennials, based on our system of generational beliefs about worth and productivity. And having suffered through years of burnout myself, I've put the expansiveness of NLP into a framework that's specific to burnout, to reprogram the beliefs that keep us stuck from living a life that's true to ourselves rather than the expectations of others that have conditioned us over time. And the fourth R is the process of rediscovering. It can be a little bit uncomfortable at times, if I'm being honest, because so many of us have spent so much of our lives masking up to measure up to society's expectations as well as our own, that eventually we begin to lose touch with our authentic self. Our identity becomes the job title. So the rediscovery process tends to happen naturally over time. And once you begin to remember the you that exists, more free of the need for validation and approval, I'm telling you, it's one of the greatest gifts you'll ever receive. Getting yourself back. The you before society and everybody else started conditioning you to become someone you're not. But as a former teacher, I strongly believe that rather than just having you be a participant in the process, it's just as important to also be a learner. to learn the techniques and the science of the mind yourself so that you can be your own solution. The Millennial Mindset Makeover program will teach you how to do the techniques on your own. When my clients come to me and they say, well, therapy didn't work for me, Peter, or it's too expensive, I get really excited to let them know that there is another option to learn the powerful mind science of NLP to go unstuck yourself. So as a former teacher and NLP coach, the education, the resources, they're all there for you. Plus some pretty cool free bonuses. But the thing is, that same subconscious mind of yours likes to talk you out of change and growth. Because even though your comfort zone might not feel too comfortable right now, at least it's kept you safe and gotten you to where you are now. So just be aware of that and give yourself permission to take that next step, to make the investment in the very thing that's creating your perception of reality, your mind. It's time for your Millennial Mindset Makeover. Can't wait to see you inside.